speak to ClinicalTrials.gov Modernization, particularly because there's a very important deadline coming up on March 14th. And so this is really great timing to be able to speak to you about this process and the opportunity to provide input. Today I plan to cover a little bit of background about ClinicalTrials.gov, to give an overview about the modernization process, and to dive into more details about the request for information, as well as opportunities for you to provide your input. As many of you may know, ClinicalTrials.gov has been around since 2000. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. Over that time, we have had tremendous growth in the usage of the site, with over 330,000 registrations now posted and over 40,000 posted results records. We have also a lot of traffic and visitors to the site. Just over 150,000 visitors come to the site each day. And those visitors I'll talk about a little bit later are equally split between patients and healthcare providers looking to find information about clinical trials, as well as researchers who are using the information for many different purposes. What you also see on this slide is how the growth of ClinicalTrials.gov has been strongly influenced by those laws and policies that have been put in place to encourage or to require registration and results reporting on the site. And all of those laws and policies were passed for particular reasons, and that was because of the value that people see in having a comprehensive system for registration and results reporting. First and foremost, thinking about patients and potential participants by ensuring that we are disseminating information about the clinical trials that people participate in. It's a way to fulfill that promise to research participants that their contributions will advance science. Having information available on ClinicalTrials.gov also helps to support people finding information on trials to participate and to enroll in. In addition to those ethical principles and obligations, registration and results reporting really helps to allow for accountability within the research enterprise. And those accountability factors are other strong benefits associated with registration and results reporting. When we're thinking about the modernization process, one of the key things that we're really thinking about and focusing on is how can we ensure that we're delivering the value that's intended by these laws and policies and the benefits that were intended to make sure that all of the different stakeholders using ClinicalTrials.gov are benefiting from it. So when we talk about the process, again, when we're talking about this modernization process, it's really about ensuring that we're providing maximum value to the public and we're putting ourselves in a position to serve our mission well into the future. When we think about the modernization process, it's also intended to serve kind of two different purposes. Again, ensuring that we have a strong infrastructure to be able to move forward and have another very successful 20 years for the project. And so we're serving our internal business processes, as well as ensuring that we're serving all of the external users of the site. And those are people who are relying on the public site, as well as those who are responsible for submitting information to be listed on the site. And so the way in which ClinicalTrials.gov really performs our work and our mission is we think about it in two main aims. One is the manner in which we collect information, and that's through the protocol registration and results system. And we really aim to ensure that we're collecting complete and informative information to ensure that it can be as useful as possible to those who rely on it on the public site. When we think about the submission process, we'll come back to this in the context of input that we're requesting as part of modernization. We have processes that depend on automated validation rules, as well as a manual quality control validation process that really focuses on assessing internal consistencies within the information submitted. And so the second aim I referred to was really thinking about how to facilitate the use of information to help those who are accessing it find studies of interest. And there's two main models by which we rely on making information available. And the one model is accessing information directly through the ClinicalTrials.gov website and interacting with the web forms that we make available. But we also have available an application programming interface, or API, that allows others to access the information in an electronic format and to repurpose it for their own uses. And so the other image that you see here is an example of a third party that's using information from ClinicalTrials.gov to target their particular community. In this case, it's breast cancer trials, and ensuring that people have information specific to breast cancer research available within this particular portal. And we think this makes a lot of sense given the fact that ClinicalTrials.gov has thousands of diseases and conditions listed within the database itself, and it is not quite possible to be able to serve all of those communities equally. And so when we're thinking about modernization, we also want to help ensure that we're making the information available in the formats that are most usable and useful to these other organizations that can better serve their own communities. So with these two aims combined and the underlying framework that we have for laws and policies that reinforce the use of ClinicalTrials.gov, we've really been able to establish it as an information scaffold off of which you can learn about information about any single clinical trial. On this graphic, we use sort of dotted lines to indicate things that we link to outside of ClinicalTrials.gov, and the more solid lines to indicate information hosted on ClinicalTrials.gov. We have a summary, that represents the registration information. We have the results database housed within ClinicalTrials.gov. And with the addition of the regulations in 2017, we've added the ability to include full protocol documents and statistical analysis plans, as well as being able to support some of the requirements within the common rule for posting informed consent form documents. You can find all of those things within certain study records on ClinicalTrials.gov. The use of a unique identifier, the NCT number, also allows for both automated and manual linking to other resources. An example of that are journal publications. When an NCT number is included in that abstract, that NCT number gets indexed within PubMed, and we can automatically identify journal publications to link to. In addition, we have information to be able to identify when information might be available about that trial in an individual patient data repository. We don't host individual participant level data on ClinicalTrials.gov, but again, offer opportunities for others to discover where such information may be available for access. So taking all of these principles, all of these activities into mind, it's all residing on some core roles and principles within the system itself. The model that we have available relies on the sponsor or the study investigator to submit information directly to ClinicalTrials.gov and to keep that information up to date as the trial progresses. In terms of the actual conduct of the trial, again, the sponsor or investigator is responsible for ensuring the safety and validity of the study and following all relevant laws and regulations. NLM's role is, of course, in providing the portal to be able to list this information, as well as making the information broadly available through the website. NLM does conduct a limited quality control review that is intended to identify apparent errors, deficiencies, or inconsistencies in the information. But listing and evaluation by ClinicalTrials.gov does not mean the study itself has been evaluated by the U.S. government. In addition, then, the site is listing information for many different uses that includes research participation. And one of the important things that is reinforced on the site is that participation really is something that should be considered in consultation with healthcare providers and other trusted advisors, and learning about all options as this decision is being considered. In terms of the overall modernization process, this is really exciting because it's going to be a multi-year process by which we have an opportunity to really expand and improve on the things that we make available to our users. We're in just the very beginning stages. We're in this first year where we're really focusing on engagement. The goal around engagement is exactly why I'm here today, to ensure that we are understanding the information that people are most interested in, and to make sure that we're understanding the greatest priorities and needs of our users. And some of the different ways in which, there'll be many different ways in which we do this, but we're kicking off the process with the request for information that we issued at the end of December, and we'll be following that up with a public meeting in which I'll provide more information about that at the end. The whole goal of the engagement process is to ensure, again, that we're understanding our users' needs and to put these needs up against each other to understand where they overlap and where they may diverge, and to help determine priorities as well as different roles and responsibilities within this process. This should allow us to develop a roadmap that will then guide us through the entire modernization process over the next several years. We will move into sort of a heavier implementation phase after this first year, and it will really allow for continuous improvements over time that will be informed by user testing and evaluation, and of course, continued engagement. And then the second bullet you see here is really focused on improvements across the entire clinical trial lifecycle. You know, we recognize that information at ClinicalTrials.gov is representing the clinical trial and its life cycle at different points in time, but that ClinicalTrials.gov is also intended to serve different aspects of this life cycle, particularly when thinking about planning for additional research as well as compiling research to inform various guidelines. And so when we're thinking about this modernization process, we really encourage you to think about this entire clinical research life cycle and where there may be opportunities to identify efficiencies and improvements to ensure greater compatibility from the very beginning of protocol development all the way to the end of results reporting. And so I mentioned the RFI that we released at the end of December, and what's really more important in terms of dates is that due date that you see on the left-hand side in the red box, March 14th, 2020 is the date by which we are requesting responses to this request for information. And again, we're really aiming to gather information so that we can help maximize the value of the site to all of our users, while also continuing to ensure that we're providing essential services that support the existing legal and policy requirements. The three topics that we've requested input on through the RFI are what you see here: website functionality, information submission, and data standards. And I'll talk about each of these in a little bit more detail. I will just note that the RFI is not intended to modify any existing legal and policy requirements, that really the input that we'll be focused on in this context is ensuring that, again, we can extract the value that's intended from the existing legal and policy requirements. And so for each topic, you'll note within the RFI itself that we have identified specific subtopics that we are requesting your input on. And you'll notice a theme in the way that we've requested input on these different subtopics, and that we're asking for very specific examples, especially of examples of the way that you use the information now, what features you think work well. And it's important to document these things that you find of value right now to ensure that we're preserving those features as we move forward with modernization. But of course, we're also really interested in understanding how these functions that you do value can be improved, and what other types of uses are not well supported, and how can we consider expanding those uses within our site. And if you have examples of good models that you think we should be aware of or be aiming to replicate or simulate, we would really appreciate that type of information as well. When I talked about the scaffolding feature, a big part of how we can help to connect and serve the clinical research ecosystem is helping people discover other information related to that clinical trial. So we are absolutely interested in what other resources you think are important to be linked to from ClinicalTrials.gov. And then finally, thinking about whether your use is dependent on a wide range of studies or more limited, and what limiting criteria are useful to you as you're looking for information. I'm going to pause here and take a little poll, trying to understand our audience a little better. What is the primary task you are trying to accomplish using ClinicalTrials.gov? Is it A, to register a trial or submit results information? Is it to use the public site to search for trials for yourself or someone else? Is it to conduct research on clinical trials, such as a landscape analysis or systematic review? Or is it none of the above? And it looks like in this audience, it is overwhelmingly coming back as registering a trial or submitting results information. So topic 2, which I'll be covering next, really focuses on the information submission aspect of modernization and is certainly where we'd expect to receive a lot of comments from this particular audience. Thank you. So back to thinking about the different users who access ClinicalTrials.gov, I had mentioned sort of the 50-50 split in our user audience. This is based on survey data from our public site, so people that have chosen to respond to the survey. As you can see, it's about half patients and healthcare providers and other caregivers, and the other half are researchers and others who are accessing the information for various purposes. And so this is important to consider as well in your responses in terms of understanding your role in the task that you're trying to accomplish in using the site. We've made some efforts over the years to continue to update the website, and so I just highlight here different aspects of the site that have been updated over time. One of the challenges that we face with managing this website is often because this site is a government website run by the National Library of Medicine, there can be a misimpression about what listing does and doesn't mean on ClinicalTrials.gov. And one of the things that we've aimed to improve over time is helping people to learn what listing does and doesn't mean. And so this is something to consider again as you're providing feedback in terms of the effectiveness and usefulness of information like this, as well as features that we've been introducing over time. I also want to mention that in the last year, we've released a new beta version of our API. As I mentioned earlier, this supports third-party electronic use of ClinicalTrials.gov content. We want to make sure that in your comments related to the modernization effort, that you have an opportunity to look at the beta API and to consider how it does or doesn't serve your needs, and thinking about what specific comments might be useful along these lines. In terms of the content of ClinicalTrials.gov, I'd referenced whether your use relies on sort of a wide or a more limited range of studies. I just provide some basic statistics here to give you a sense of the content available within ClinicalTrials.gov right now and the spread of information that's available. One of the things that sometimes isn't always fully recognized is that there are requirements related to listing some information about expanded access. And so you can see there are a number of studies listed that provide information on whether expanded access is available. And of course, health is global, as we're understanding so much these present days. And our research studies represent that as well in terms of where information, where research is being conducted that's listed on ClinicalTrials.gov. So moving on to the second topic for the RFI that really seems to be of most interest, particularly for this audience, is around information submission. We really want to ensure that the submission process is as simple and as easy as it can be. And so we're interested in input on what aspects of the submission process would most benefit from improvements. We're really interested, again, in thinking about that clinical research lifecycle and sort of the ecosystem in which clinical trials are conducted, where there may be opportunities to align with other organization processes, including some of the existing trial management software or other tools that you may already be using that we should be thinking about for enhancing interoperability. We're also really interested, particularly in the context of the quality control review process, how people see opportunities for novel or emerging methods to really support that submission and review process. We're always working to make it as useful informational materials as possible, and we're interested in what input you have on materials that could make the process easier for you. And then we also recognize that people invest and organizations invest a lot of effort in fulfilling the requirements for both registration and results reporting. And we're interested in your ideas around ways to credit, incentivize, or recognize the efforts of individuals and organizations who are submitting this information on a regular basis. I'm going to stop here and ask another poll question just to get a sense of what your personal involvement has been in using submission to ClinicalTrials.gov. Have you registered a study or submitted results information to ClinicalTrials.gov? Yes, registration only for A. B, yes, registration and results information. C is no, no experience with registration or results submission. D, no, not personally, but a member of my team has. And E, yes, but we use a third party to help ensure information is submitted. This one seems to be more evenly distributed as the results are coming in. It's really a mix. It seems like it's split evenly between all of the answers. I don't know if that means we asked the question correctly or got the right distribution there. Great, thank you. And so thinking about the submission process, just to reinforce some of the basics and the concepts, on the registration information side, and this first bullet applies to the results as well, there's two different methods by which information can be provided, interactive data entry or through automated upload. We're absolutely interested in your input on both of these methods as it relates to information submission. Anyone can enter information into the system, but it must be the responsible party that submits the information. And our content, in terms of the data elements and the data items that are available, reflect the legal requirements. They reflect international standards for reporting, as well as good reporting practices. And then we've worked to ensure that when information aligns with NIH grant applications, that content is the same and using the same definition, so increasing the opportunities it can be reused across systems. One thing I'll just point out here as well, that when navigating the system, we do have different customized data elements depending on the study type that's being submitted. In this case, we're highlighting the interventional studies, observational studies, and expanded access as having different informational requirements depending on what you choose up front for that information. On the side of results information submission, it is again a structured system, and that structure is intended to support the requirements that were established within the law, being able to provide tabular information. But the structure also ensures that the system, from a validation perspective, can ensure some of those requirements are being met on an automated basis, so ensuring that certain data elements are completed before submission. It also helps to support the quality control review process by having information in a structured format. The information is in the same place each time, and that also supports data display. So again, when people are accessing the information and viewing it on ClinicalTrials.gov, you can always expect the same information to be in the same place. The requirements that we've implemented also do align with good reporting practices in addition to the underlying legal requirements that exist. But we understand that a lot of submitters have the most challenges with the result submission aspect of the site. And some of it relates a little bit to being able to map the information that you have to the terminology and information that we have on ClinicalTrials.gov. What we're showing here on the site is how one might go about entering a baseline measure You would need to provide the information about what the baseline measure is. Weight is a very common measurement that might be taken. You're providing information about the arms in the study, basically to form your table, and the number of participants that would be included in that assessment, and then identifying what your measure type is, which again, if I were to ask you what a measure type is in abstract, it might be difficult to identify that, but when you see our pull-down list of options and definitions, it's really clear what's intended, and in this case, a mean and a standard deviation are provided with the associated data. And then to be able to interpret that measure, you need to know what the unit of measure is. Weight can be measured in many different things: pounds, ounces. In this case, it was kilograms. And so in terms of the quality control review process at ClinicalTrials.gov, we talked about modernization being able to enhance efficiency of our own business processes. The QC review process that we have in place, again, identifies apparent errors, deficiencies, or inconsistencies within the study record itself. On the registration side, we review all study records within 5 days, and we're processing about 1,200 registration records per week with an additional 6,600 updates to registration records each week. It's a very significant volume. On the results side, our goal is to review all study records in less than 25 days. We're currently processing close to 300 results records per week, as well as 140 updated results records per week. And those processing numbers represent sort of the total numbers in that our incoming and outgoing are about equal. In terms of our quality control review process, in addition to the manual process that we conduct before the submission even occurs, I talked about the structure being able to reinforce information being complete. One of the requirements within the regulations is to provide with information on baseline characteristics, the overall number of people that were analyzed for that baseline measure. If that information is blank, we're able to provide automated feedback to remind the submitter to include that information before it's submitted. This is the type of thing within modernization that we're really looking for input on in terms of thinking about how we can improve and enhance automation to provide more just-in-time feedback before the information is submitted for processing. In terms of the manual review process, when information is submitted, assuming again that the information was complete before it was submitted, information may come in looking like this. The baseline measured title was indicated as GOG performance status with 3 possible options, 0, 1, and 2. If you're not in this particular field of research, you may have difficulty interpreting whether you might want to be a 0 or a 2 on this particular scale. And so our quality control review process would reinforce the need to provide descriptive information alongside that content. And you can see by adding some brief descriptions, by expanding the acronym and explaining those 0, 1, and 2 categories, it's much clearer which one you would prefer to be in yourself. When we think about this QC review process and how we may be able to optimize and improve it through modernization, we're also interested in tracking some baseline measures around how well the process is working now to see if we have and see if we are making improvements over time. In general, about 70% of records meet the QC review criteria after 2 submission cycles. You can see that number is much lower on that first cycle. And ideally, through the modernization process, we would be aiming to make improvements in these success rates for organizations over time. We also know a lot about the types of issues that seem to be the most frequently occurring. Those top 5 issues are listed here on this slide, and they then become sort of our first targets for how we might aim to make improvements to the system to help reduce the number of issues within these categories that may be occurring. And so again, when you're thinking about your comments around data submission, thinking about opportunities that there may be for reducing these types of major issues. We've tried over time to release additional informational materials that can help people understand the process and the requirements easier. We launched a new guided tutorials resource in August of this past year, which focused on result submission content. And we expect to be launching this tutorial with additional registration content this spring. We've been collecting feedback via a survey, but again, thinking about modernization in the RFI, we're interested in understanding whether the resources we're making available are indeed useful to you and what other types of resources you would find helpful in the process. The final topic that we're requesting input on is data standards. This really overlaps and intersects with the previous two topics, which was why we called it out as its own separate topic. And we're really interested in understanding which specific standards you think may be useful and also explaining how they may be useful to better understand those use cases for how they may better support your own uses. We're also really interested in understanding ways to sort of balance the use of standards with retaining flexibility in submission. And we always need to ensure that the content is accurately reflecting what was documented in the study protocol itself. And so when you think about commenting on data standards as part of the RFI, we also encourage you to think about all of these opportunities throughout the clinical trial lifecycle that you may be using data standards already and thinking about their application to the registration and result submission process. And so our final poll, after hearing all of these different topics that we're interested in, which of these is most important to you to be addressed first with improved features? And you get to pick two. Topic A is website functionality, focusing on enhancing the public site features. B is around information submission, how to credit, incentivize, or recognize efforts. C is also information submission, enhancing interoperability with existing software application or tools. D, information submission, we know our audience here. Support submission quality with more automated support. And information submission, again, provide more informational materials and resources. And then the last category, F, data standards, enhancing submission or reuse of clinical trial information. Pick two. Interesting. Website functionality seems to be ranking at the top, and then more automated support, I think, is leading the information submission topics, but they're also really well distributed. So this is an important question. Again, thinking about these priorities and your uses, help us to understand in those categories which informational materials, which formats, which types of things would be most useful to you, and be very specific so that we can learn from that as we're moving forward. So the fun part, actually submitting your feedback. The NIH Office of Science Policy has put out a really great guide in which they call it the Insider's Guide to Effective Commenting on NIH Policies. And they give very specific tips about providing input. And I recommend that you review this before submitting your comments. These are themes I've been trying to reinforce throughout this discussion, but being specific is really important for us to understand both the comments and how it may be actionable. If you have any data or evidence to support your comments, we're also interested in that, as it can really inform how we approach a particular topic. And again, we've asked specific questions because we're interested in those questions. So do be sure to answer the questions that we've asked, but also within that, don't be afraid to include new ideas. We really are interested in what you have to say. And thinking about, again, emphasizing what matters most. If there are comments and there are 20 different things within the response, sometimes it can be hard to understand which of those 20 are your priority. And so think about within the comments if there's a way to emphasize or prioritize the things that matter most to you or the audience that you are serving. So a few reminders about submitting feedback. The deadline is March 14th. That is a week from tomorrow, and it will promptly close at midnight Eastern time. The responses that are submitted will be posted publicly without change after the close of the comment period. So think about that in your responses. Make sure you're not including anything that you would not want to be made public. And then again, just a reminder that the RFI is not intended to modify existing legal and policy requirements. We are planning to share what we've learned from the RFI pretty soon after it closes. We're currently planning for a public meeting at the end of April, April 30th. We just recently opened registration for this meeting. We have links within the slide set to be able to access that information. Our goal for that meeting is to be able to share a summary, a high-level summary of the RFI responses and what we're seeing as the initial themes and priorities, and to have an opportunity for discussion with all of our different users and stakeholders to again get additional discussion around the topics and any clarification that you may have to provide for us. It will be hosted at the NIH, but also available by videocast. We have been releasing information and notifying people about updates about modernization on our website. And when we add significant content, we provide it through this email bulletin, hot off the PRS. You can sign up through it through this link. And then finally, just reinforcing, you can learn more about modernization. We've established a website, a web page on ClinicalTrials.gov that has all things modernization on it. It will always have the most up-to-date information. That deadline again, March 14th. And save the date for the public meeting, and registration is now available for that. I really thank you for the time that you've taken today to listen to this presentation, and we are very much looking forward to receiving your feedback through the RFI. We're going to take a few minutes to pause here on this end to look at the questions that have been coming in, and we will be back shortly to address those questions. Thank you. Hi, this is Becky Williams. We are back. There have been a lot of questions coming in, and unfortunately we won't have time to be able to address all of them, but we've been prioritizing them based on the things that most directly impact the RFI and providing input within the next week, since that's the deadline that we have most immediately approaching. There are a couple of issues that I realized I might have skipped over acronyms, which is something that we are inclined to do in government, so I apologize for that. One of them was about who and what is NLM. NLM is the National Library of Medicine. We are one of the institutes at the National Institutes of Health, and a great opportunity when I was talking about policies. Another policy that we support is the NIH policy, which now requires all NIH-funded clinical trials to be registered and to have results reported on ClinicalTrials.gov. Another acronym that I used, I guess, kind of quickly as well was the NCT Number. This is the unique identifier that we assign to a registration record on ClinicalTrials.gov. It does allow for you can search by NCT number, and one of the great things about unique identifiers is it does allow for linking and finding information in other resources that also use that unique identifier. One of the questions that had come in related to that was related to PubMed Abstracts. There's a question asking whether we do link to PubMed Abstracts, and we do. We do this through two different mechanisms. One is that the responsible party can actually add that citation directly to the ClinicalTrials.gov study record. The other mechanism that we do it by, and which we aim to further and enhance and improve, is through an automatic method. The NCT number gets indexed in PubMed, which means that we can basically search PubMed every night looking for NCT numbers and automatically connecting those PubMed citations to the study record that had that same NCT number listed. And so again, thinking about modernization though, and linking to resources, we're definitely interested in feedback on how well these functions are working and other resources that might be useful to think about in terms of being able to link to. There's a question asking about if there's a dedicated team that's available for support related to the beta API interface. We absolutely are able to provide support to people if they have questions on being able to use it. It also informs what information we can make available on the site to make that information more easily understood on its own. If you do have questions and need support, you can email our customer service email address, which is register@clinicaltrials.gov. You see it on the screen right now. Again, where it says additional questions, email register@clinicaltrials.gov. We have a team dedicated to answering those emails, and you'll usually receive a response back quite quickly. I would also encourage you, though, again, in the same vein, if there are resources or informational materials that you think would make using our API or other resources easier, be sure to comment on that in the RFI itself. There were a few questions that came in related to certain functionalities and how something may work, or asking some general questions about that. Again, I just sort of want to reinforce that if there's a particular use that you rely on and that could be improved, to be sure to comment on that. One of the questions had come in related to how search functions around location information and how that directs people to clinical trial content based on the location of the clinical trial itself. We're interested in your feedback on how that works and how that can be improved. There are quite a few questions that related to observational studies generally, when I had spoken to the fact that about 20% of observational studies are registered in ClinicalTrials.gov. Again, as we're conducting this feedback process, we're really interested in what your specific considerations and questions are around those studies, and how well you think they are supported, and other considerations that you think that we should be aware of as this particular area is really evolving right now as well. There were some questions that also addressed some ambiguity about what can and can't be included in ClinicalTrials.gov. Clinical trials, can be listed based on a number of factors, but we're certainly interested in what we can do to help people better understand, again, what studies are listed on the site to help provide the appropriate context in that space. There's questions about the public meeting and how that will be structured. We have posted a draft agenda, and we will be updating that agenda over time with more details. One thing I didn't mention as part of the modernization process is that we have also been engaging with the NLM, National Library of Medicine, Board of Regents working group. The Board of Regents is one of the groups that provides advice and input into how NLM manages its operations. It's bringing in external expertise to make sure that the way NLM does its business is in alignment with sort of the public needs. We've established a working group off of that NLM Board of Regents, in which we have external members who are also providing input and expertise into this process of modernization as we go forward. Our Board of Regents working group members will be participating in the public meeting, and you can certainly expect to hear from them. And we will be adding information to our website shortly that will allow you to provide more easily access information about that Board of Regents working group. I will also mention with respect to the public meeting, in that, right now many conditions related to travel are kind of in play, and whether large public meetings may or may not occur in the context of coronavirus. We are monitoring this and are working on a contingency plan for a virtual only meeting in case that is necessary. We do intend to announce any changes to the format by April 1st. But of course, this is kind of an evolving situation that we'll do our best to be keeping up with. Someone had asked whether response to the RFI is mandatory. Nope, this is a fully optional activity that you can participate in. Again, just keeping in mind that the way that we can help best meet your needs is knowing about your needs and responding to that information request. Another question was asking how the modernization process may change things, whether it's related to the submission process or to the public site. The whole idea about this engagement process over the next year is to make sure that we're getting your input on what things would be most useful to change, and to be able to communicate regularly and clearly about what that roadmap might look like and the things that we're aiming to address and prioritize first in that process. So again, this is your opportunity to help influence what that may look like. There's been a few questions asking about if someone had a complaint or something that they wanted to provide to our staff in confidence, how they may go about doing that. We do have several mechanisms available. We run a survey on our site if you're interested in providing feedback that way. Again, through this modernization process, we're most interested in receiving feedback through the RFI itself. But that email address I mentioned, register@ClinicalTrials.gov, can always be used to provide information to our team as needed. There were some questions about how to access information about the API itself. The slides that will be available after this include links to the page that houses the so many acronyms. I fell into the trap myself. That houses the API can be accessed from those slides. There's also other places on our website if you were downloading content for analysis where we refer you to that content. Again, we are aiming to continue to enhance the API, and your feedback is welcome. There's some questions about different systems that people use to collect and organize their own information, and sometimes those informational sources don't always align as well as people would like. And again, as I was mentioning, sort of in the context of that entire clinical trial lifecycle, we're really interested in the different systems and tools that you're using and where there may be opportunities to enhance and improve those compatibilities or interoperabilities. So definitely do provide us feedback on those systems that you think are important to have better alignment with. I think that we have reached the end of the questions. And so I really thank everyone for their input. If there are questions that we did not address, we still have them and know that they are of interest. So thank you for providing those as well. And again, the deadline for the RFI is March 14th, 2020. Don't be late.